If you have ever joined the world in thinking the word cunt is one of the worst words someone can utter, this episode is for you. This podcast is for anyone who is in the process of becoming. I hope whoever is meant to hear what I have to say is listening. But as always, all the cunts to the front. It is one of, if not the most heavily tabooed word in the world. Its very definition is a vulgar word for the vulva or vagina. But centuries ago, it was a completely neutral word. It was an anatomical term. Now, what we know for sure is that there's no one exact origin, but there are roots in Hindu, Germanic, Scandinavian, and English. The word cunt dates back thousands of years. Let's jump over to Asia real quick in 200 to 400 BC. There was this Hindu goddess named Kunti. She was written about in the historical text, the Mahabharata, and her meaning of her name meant the great yoni of the universe. How badass is that? She was known for leading a powerful matriarchy and encompassing life itself. She was worshipped in hundreds of shrines across ancient Asia, mainly current day India and Nepal, but we can't discount Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or Pakistan because they have historical ties to the Mahabharata. And they had Hindu temples where Kunti may have very well been worshipped. For all I know, it's pronounced Kunti, but I digress. So now let's look at a different era. Let's look at the medieval times, which is about 476 to about 1400 CE. CE meaning Common Era, which was basically preferred terminology in academics and non-religious contexts in a more inclusive way to refer to the same time period. So CE basically is AD. And when I hear medieval times, I kind of think of Robin Hood men in tights and hot women in chastity belts. But cunts are all over medieval culture and literature, and it was not offensive. It was never seen as offensive. But that era lasted 1,000 years, so there's definitely a negative turning point. So let's jump over to France and England in that medieval era. Toward the end of it, in the 1200s, we see different meanings for different words. So there was vulva, which meant womb, but if you look at the French meaning, it meant wrapper. Something that's purpose is to hold something else. How empowering. So now let's look at 1230, which is the first English citation of the word cunt in England, and it was a street called Grope Cunt Lane. Can't make this up, but it was the red light district. But at that time, they used to name streets based off of what was sold there. So there was like Silver Street, where you would buy things made of silver, and Fish Street, and et cetera, and things like that. So now let's take a little turn to a different part of the globe. Let's look at Mesoamerica, so like Mexico and Central America. Now there were Incan goddesses like Pachamama and Mama Quilla, which were known for fertility, and a Mayan goddess, Ichel, I believe, that is also known for fertility. But I want to look at Aztec Empire, specifically around the 1300, 1400 CE. So that's when the Aztecs started to adopt and adapt deities into their practices and their way of living. There's one goddess, Chachutlicue, who is a goddess of flowing water, fertility, birth, and things like that. But there's this one Aztec goddess that I love so much. Her name is Xochiquetzal. She's the goddess of beauty, fertility, flowers, and the arts. There are many different myths about her, but one thing that has been overlapped many times in stories is that she was known for and associated with love, lovemaking, sexuality, sensuality. She was the archetype of femininity and voluptuousness, and she was plentiful in sexual allure, basically. And she enriched the world by giving flowers that were said to have been made from her vulva. That shit is empowering. That shit is empowering. So that's around 1300, 1400s, right? Let's cut to the 1500s. 1500s were kind of like the end of the party everywhere on the globe. That's when the Spanish conquest happened in 1521, when Cortes came to Mesoamerica, and they imposed religious practices of Christianity. And after 1521, it was basically the fall of the Aztec Empire, the Incan Empire. The Mayan Empire was already pretty much declined, but it was definitely finished off with the conquest. And then the only thing left from these deities after the practices of Christianity were imposed were just myths and stories that were passed on in communities and culture, which honestly breaks my heart. So we're in the 1500s. Now we're going to pop over from Mesoamerica over to England. We're getting into the Shakespeare era, right? And the dawn of extremely harmful Christian doctrine, aka the demonization of female sexuality as we know it. Now, Shakespeare never used the word outright, but his wordplay around the word cunt, without ever saying it, cemented its status as taboo. Now, I remember, I'm a 90s kid, right? I grew up in the Midwest. I remember growing up, and if someone was like gay, it was whispered. It was like, oh, they're gay, or oh yeah, they're gay. And which meant it was taboo, like it was bad. And when I was a kid, I was like, oh no, we're not supposed to say that out loud. Cut to me being queer and coming out at 29 and my partner is a woman. But that's an example, right, of how it can be cemented as taboo. Something can be seen by like either not being said, hinted at, or whispered, right? So let's get back to history. Where 1500s England and the Puritans stigmatized sexuality. So the Christians in the Middle Ages decided that women's genitals were a source of evil. So it went from neutrality to something to be ashamed of, and then went further. It became something to be feared. I even read that there were Christian clergymen that preached the idea of being wary of a woman's genitals, using the term cunnus diabola, which translated to devilish cunt. You go from goddess Kunti to devilish cunt. What a downgrade. Speaking of her, you know all those amazing shrines that I mentioned? Yeah, the great Yoni of the universe. All of her shrines across South Asia were completely destroyed at this time because it was blasphemous in the Middle Ages with this whole Christian doctrine. Now let's go a little bit further in the future, into the 1700s. You see words like cunny, which meant rabbit, and cunt coming out with different words and linguistic backgrounds, right? Cunt meant little house. Old Norse had kunta, which meant vulva. Danish had kunte. Dutch had kont, which meant buttocks. Germanic had kotex, kut. Latin had cunis, which meant vulva. And in the 17th century, the word scabbard meant sword sheath, but that word was used to refer to a woman's vagina. I think medically, actually, I believe I read that. I can double check. So basically, it's completely dependent on a penis for semantics. Like sword sheath basically meant its only significance is to hold men's genitalia. Like that's the purpose. Nothing else. Sorry. And going back to the meaning of words, you know, the word cunning didn't always mean sneaky. Like that's what it means now, but it used to mean, like the root of it used to mean like someone who was wise, interestingly enough. And the root is also cunt. Now, today, you go to the word or the words cunt, cunty, cuntish. It can mean unpleasant, objectionable behavior, to be drunk or highly intoxicated. These are all the definitions that I found. It was even quoted the most offensive word on TV. Now let's go 200 years into the future and look at people who are trying to reappropriate the word in a better way. So you have like Lady Chatterley's Lover, the book by D.H. Lawrence that came out in 1928. It's a joyful account of promiscuous sex from a woman's point of view. The power of mutual orgasm. They use cunt freely in the text to express like sexual pleasure. Now, even though it was written by a man, he does have a lot of homoerotic undertones in his work, so take that as you will. You have The Cunt Cheerleaders by Judy Chicago in the 1970s. You have Vagina Monologues by Eve Ensler. It comes out in 96. And it's all about reclaiming it, right? She even says, I call it cunt. I reclaimed it. Cunt. I really like it. You have books like Cunt, Declaration of Independence, in 98, I believe, by Inga Muschau, I believe is how you enunciate it. And I just want to offer a thought to people. People who think that cussing or the word cunt is low class and vulgar. I think words are energy. And I think energy is everything. I used to have a friend who didn't have the best energy. She always wanted to call me bitch as like a term of endearment. And it never felt right to me. And I actually drew that boundary all the time. And she'd be like, look, bitch. And it didn't feel right. So I would basically condition her to let her know that I was one of those friends, that it wasn't okay to call me that. Like, don't go there with me, because it just didn't feel good. But later I made a friend who had better energy, like higher vibrational energy. And she was like, okay, bitch, yes, let's do this, And I was like, okay, that is dear. Like that, it came from a different place. It changed my perspective. You may call me that, to her. They're important people, like sex historian Kate Lister having TED Talks and sharing thoughts like this one I'm going to quote from her that broke my heart and empowered me at the same time. She said, sex is an extremely important battleground for sexual liberation. How do you talk about your bodies if the very words you use are considered to be offensive? You have people you can follow right now, like sex educator Naomi Morgan, Gabrielle Smith, who's a certified sex educator, and she encourages overcoming sexual shame. You have Irma Garcia, Rebecca Arvedes Story, who's a sexologist that promotes sex positivity. You have these people available right now to find and follow. It never made sense to me, and even more now that I've done the research, how someone calling you a cunt is like a diss. Like, if it equals vagina, if that's like its meaning right now, right? Like, hey, you cozy, squishy birth canal. Hey, you pleasure-inducing and or reproductive center. Hey, you giver of life, metaphorical and or literal. It doesn't make any sense as a diss. It doesn't make any sense, especially after all of this research. Some people would argue that people with penises should not be allowed to use the word cunt. I don't think I agree with that. I just think the way in which we use the word matters. And the energy you put behind it really matters. I think it's everything. The root meanings of cunt are woman, knowing, queen, and wisdom.